Hey everyone, Morgan here from the Photo Business Success Podcast. I'm joined with my co host, Megan. Today, we're going to be talking about why you should quit your photography business, sounds super controversial and not why we're usually here, considering our podcast is called the Photo Business Success Podcast. But Megan, do you want to take it away and kind of like dig into why we thought this was a good topic?
Yeah. So I think for starters, I don't know about all the other photographers in the world, although I have with a lot of them, but there were points where I really felt like quitting was the best option, quitting was the only option. And no one out
When
there was talking about why they were leaving or why they were staying. And so, as we have explored just having conversations with photographers, especially in this format, helping photographers with making the right decisions for themselves and for their businesses, this seemed like a really appropriate topic from honestly, I mean, from one person who's still a photographer, from one person who did eventually leave. And I think collectively we've guided a couple hundred people in their businesses. So honestly, I think it's a conversation that's not being had enough and it's not being had with without the emotion. I don't know about you, but like when I see this happening online, when I see people having this conversation online in groups of photographers, usually it's because they've gotten to the point where finances are just really bad or where their mental health is really bad or where things in their family are really bad and they're at the point where everything has to work and that is not the best time to be making a decision on such a big and important thing. So, we thought y'all got through busy season. Hopefully by now have gotten through all or at least most of your editing, and this seemed like a great time to talk about or not to keep your business because it is okay for that to not be the right thing, but we wanna help you make the decision if that's not the right thing.
Right. One thing that you mentioned to me probably 6 months ago, I think it was that just because this is what you've been doing doesn't mean that this is what you have to do forever. It can
Right,
be a season of your life, and that is fine. And if, you know, you're at that point where you're making that decision, that's okay. If you are ready to leave, that's fine, if that's what's best for you. And I think, like, people aren't giving others the permission to do that enough. And I am all for that. I have said that to, like, multiple friends of mine who have decided to leave the industry. They've decided that this wasn't the right fit for them, and I'm, like, here to support them. One of my closest friends left the industry this year, and I supported her 100%. She still second shoots for me occasionally because she just doesn't wanna run the business side of things, and that's fine. Like, the business side is probably the most important part of the business and where people tend to get burnt out the most because they forget that, like, this is part of owning a business is the business side. They do this for the craft and the art, and they forget that, hey, like, we have to be good at marketing, or we at least have to, like, have the resources to have good marketing and have good copywriting and no sales and things like that. And our business isn't just about photography. In fact, that's probably the smallest part of it. That's just the service we're delivering. And like most of us know, pretty much anybody can do that. It doesn't take much work to learn how to be a photographer. And that sounds really harsh, but it's also pretty true. It's not like being a surgeon. We
and to that point, it's also, like, I don't know about you, but some of the best artists I know, not great business people, and so
absolutely.
you can be an incredible photographer and have, like, absolutely honed your craft and still be struggling business-wise, make things make sense, and
Absolutely.
I actually think that's probably, like, more common than
People want
the
to admit.
alternative of or than, like, the opposite rather, which is, like, the opposite is really good at business and, like, honestly mediocre at photography.
Absolutely. I mean, the 2 of us will admit 100% that we're not the best photographers, and that's fine. I have never claimed to be, but we're both pretty decent business owners, so I think that's where it kind of comes to a head is, do you wanna be a business owner, or do you just want to do this for fun
Yeah.
and make beautiful art? And if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine, but probably don't rely your entire income on it then.
And also, you can 100% like continue to do photography and do photography for money, but like not have it be your primary thing. Like, what if you were going to shoot 10 weddings a year and like that's going to be an extra, $40,000. Like, I get that after you pay other people and taxes and everything, it's less than that. We'll call it 20,000. But like, honestly, that's like, that's not bad, an extra 20,000 to getting paid to do something that you love 10 weekends a year, like,
As a
that's
side
awesome.
hustle,
Yeah, and
I mean,
there's
not even a
no
side
shame
hustle,
in
like,
that.
fuck.
There is no shame in, like, getting paid to do your hobby. So,
Absolutely.
let's talk about some reasons to quit, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the biggest reasons I've seen recently where people are on the edge if they wanna quit is they're blaming things on the economy and aren't able to make sales. And that's fine if that's the perspective you want to have, but truth is there are plenty of photographers out there who are still making hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, there's something else missing
Think
for
maybe
you.
there's a kinder way to approach this. Everyone wants to be in sales and marketing. And so yeah, like as Morgan said, you can you can be in a place where like you're not making the sales that you need and to be full time for it to make sense for this to be your full-time thing. And I also think that full-time in photography is sort of a misnomer, I guess I would say, because I don't know a lot of photographers who are actually working 40 hours a week on like in their businesses from a regular like week to week standpoint and who are not making ends meet. So like I think a full-time photographer just means you're not doing anything else for income. So if you're one of those people and you're not making ends meet, then and you don't want to become a sales and marketing like professional because by the way, like that is what you are.
That is what
You
you
are
are.
a sales and marketing professional. If you don't want that, that's a great indicator that this is not for you and that really in general owning a business is not for you.
Absolutely. And obviously, there are resources out there for help with marketing and things like that. But in order to get to that point, you do have to have some decent sales experience, not sales experience, but like the ability to make sales and the ability to handle marketing to get you to the point where you can afford to have these other people helping you out, which is honestly, like, when you get to that point, it's great because that's, like, one thing off your plate, but you're still in charge of all those things. You're still kind of like a manager and handling all of the day-to-day of everything. But if you don't like sales, that's fine. It just might mean that, like, owning a business isn't for you, and that's fine. And when we say, like, being good at sales, we don't mean being salesy.
Right.
I think that's like a big misunderstanding when it comes to sales is that you have to be like used car salesman type person. That's not it at all. You just have to be compelling and give people a reason as to like why they should work with you. So I think that's like a big misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, I think another reason, and I'm biased towards this reason because this is ultimately why I left, is that you don't love it anymore. And like for me particularly, I noticed that I was just not happy to be at wedding days anymore. And that was like an increasing feeling of like, ugh, like I would wake up in the morning, ugh, like I just don't want to go shoot a wedding. And once I'm in professional mode, I'm like, I'm fine.
Right.
I am not the kind of person who will let myself show up anything other than excellent. So I'm I'm still showing up and doing a great job on the wedding day. And I'm like I'm in it. So I'm not like angry to be there. But it just like it got to the point where like I didn't like weddings. And I personally felt like I had this moment where I felt like everyone deserves to have someone who as their photographer, someone who longs to be at their wedding, who loves being at their
Absolutely.
wedding. And so, like, when I was shooting weddings for friends, towards the end of my business, I associates, and so I wasn't shooting as much and I was pickier and I would really specifically pick the weddings that I either wanted to do because they were friends and,
Mm.
refer people I'd encountered before or they were in cool destinations or whatever. And even that became something that wasn't enough. That idea of that venue that we've always wanted to shoot at just didn't do it 17 years into doing business like that. I was tired, I was cranky, I didn't wanna stand on my feet for 16 hours, not because I couldn't, but because it wasn't what I loved anymore,
It wasn't
and
fulfilling.
yeah, and so even though I did have associates and could move on to something else, like, within the business, I also noticed that for me, business was not challenging anymore. It felt like something that I don't know, in a totally non-arrogant way, it was like a been there, done that, conquered it kind of thing, and and I was ready for something with more complexity and more depth. I loved having a team. I had learned so much about business and myself and leadership and all the things not to do. I made a lot of mistakes in my business. And so it just seemed like a good time for me to graduate. And so there's kind of like a lot of nuance and a lot of little reasons in there that I think any of those little reasons could be enough for someone to say, "Hey, I'm calling it quits." That was a good one. But and I can't remember if we talked about this in our first episode or not when we were sharing our stories. I almost quit in I think it was 2010 for financial reasons, which is so funny because like 2015 was then the year that I made like a ton of money. And it's so funny
Yeah.
that I like almost quit. But in 2014 in the slow season at the start, I
Right.
think it was like February, March, I was running out of money. I was living with my parents and, like, not able to do what I wanted to do. Like, I had a
Yeah.
car payment that I remember being stressed about and, just, like, all the little things, and financially, at that time, it was like, I can't actually live the life that I want to live if
Mhm.
I'm continuing to make photography my whole thing. And I think that, like, this is probably where a lot of photographers are, is just in that financial strain,
Yeah.
and like, it because it has to be successful, it's really hard to make it successful. And so I actually went and knew that I was going to work on my business, but I went and got a job and for a year, almost exactly a year, it ended up being a little bit longer, but I worked on my photography business while I was working a crazy difficult job, a job where I was working basically 12 hours a day, 10 to 12 hours a day, plus sitting in 3 to 4 hours of traffic every day. And, would come home and work on the business.
Mhm.
And that was the time where I switched from being an artist to being a business
For
person.
someone.
And it was invaluable, it was so challenging, I was exhausted all the time because I literally I would get home at, like, 8 p.m., and at that point, like, most of the time I hadn't eaten dinner,
Yep.
and I mean, it was just so, and I was like I said, I was living with my parents, and it was like everything was so hard.
Yep.
But in retrospect, having that job that paid all the bills was
Yep.
then what gave me the freedom on the weekends to, like, go do what I needed to do. And I also, by the way, I don't talk a ton about this, but I started second shooting a bunch during that time. So I did have my own weddings, not too many, but I think I probably had like 20 of my own weddings that year. Yeah, 2014, I probably had like 20 weddings. But I also was second shooting for other people kind of whenever I could.
Yep.
And because it wasn't my full-time thing, I found that I suddenly had all this creative energy for
Mhm.
things like networking with vendors, and I
Yep.
was able to get into one of the most important venues for, like, that ended up sending us a ton of leads. I was able to really invest in SEO, and as we've talked about, I think on past episodes, SEO was, like, that was the thing that made my business.
Yep.
I went to a workshop one day on video. This was, 2014, 2015, so
Yeah.
video was like a new concept on using video in your business.
Mhm.
And so, like, I got to make decisions from a place of I don't need everything to work, and that
Right.
helped me be less emotional. That I heard something recently, sorry, I'm about
You're
to be
good.
finished, I promise. I heard something recently that when emotion is high, logic is low. And I just, like, that has stuck with me. And I've looked back kind of over my life and been like, oh man, like, my emotion was so high when I was in scarcity and felt like
Mhm.
I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. But once I had my bills covered, logic was high. My ability to make the right decisions for my business was so much better than when I was in scarcity.
Yeah. And I think it also gives you the financial freedom to invest where you want to invest. That was a big thing for me too. I didn't go full time in my business until 2020. So I did 4 years, I think, ish, where I worked a part time job or worked a full time job, actually, and then went full time in my business. And it gave us the peace knowing that it didn't have to work. It gave us security and it gave us the ability to invest where I needed to grow where I needed to. And that was a really big thing. It was really scary being like, stressed financially, especially moving to a new city and not knowing how I was going to get my name out there. But at least I had this basically full-time job to care for things and pay the bills while I built this business. And I will say I accidentally went full-time. It wasn't intentional, which, like, you guys know from our first episode, but it it gave us the sense of security that we needed in order to be okay living here. If we had still been living in Ohio, where our mortgage was literally $300, that's a whole other story. I could have gone full-time sooner, but that wasn't our dreams. And so it's okay to have another job. I want to give all the photographers out there, like, this message and, like, grace that, like, it's okay to have another job, but also, like, don't overwhelm yourself. Like, please, like, be responsible with it. Don't do what Megan did. I
I
I
mean,
don't
I can't say don't, 'cause I got a lot from it.
I know. I'm just saying, like,
It's not for
there was
everyone.
a lot of lack of sleep. So, I'm just saying, like, be responsible with it and don't neglect your relationships because of it. If you need to do it for, like, 6 months to get ahead, like, to really go hard, that's one thing, but make sure everybody who's important in your life is on board with that too. I think that's a really big thing.
I mean, I think that there are situations where you have to do what you have to do to get ahead, and, I went from that working, what was it, 12 hours a day, probably, like, 3 or 4 on my business. I went from that to Then by 2016, I was working over 100 hours a week in my business. And I quite frankly, like, I'm not mad about it. I look back and I got to where I am today because of that. I
Absolutely.
I'm not yeah, I cannot say don't do that personally because I'm very happy with my life, but, like, I also didn't have a family. I didn't my close friends were photographers, so
They
they
get
kind of
it.
understood. People who didn't like it were not, like, as important in my life, and I knew what I was prioritizing in that time. I knew that I was trying to build something.
Absolutely.
So, like, I think that photography is an incredible starter business for some people, and for some people, it is, like, an incredible, like, the business.
The business.
For me, it was a starter business, and by going all in and being willing to sacrifice not quite everything, but almost everything for success in it and for the learning lessons that it gave me, I it was worth it. It was worth it.
I think you have to be in the right place for that. I like, if it was me right now, I couldn't do that.
Mm.
It's
Don't do it if you have young kids, like, not worth it at all if you have young kids.
absolutely.
There are other businesses where you can work from home, make more money, have flexibility that are a lot easier. Don't do photography as if you have photography with that intensity if you have young kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else you wanna touch on today?
I don't think so. I do wanna say this. It took me a lot of trial and error, and we've talked about this in the past, and we'll talk about it more in the future, but it took me a lot of trial and error to find ways to make it easier, that whole idea of, like, work smart, not hard. I did not do a good job of learning from other people on that. Like, I made all of the mistakes, all of the mistakes. Actually, I did later find plenty more mistakes to make, but at the time, I made so, so, so many mistakes. And one of the things that Morgan and I are really passionate about and really care about is helping you get those shortcuts, like literally skip over all the mistakes that we have collectively made. And that
Yep.
is specifically why we made the wedding multiplier toolkit. And like, I can't remember how much it is, but like whatever the price is, like we played with way higher price points. We played with lower price points and, like, ultimately, like, we landed where we did, which is inexpensive for the
What are gets.
like, for how many leads it will bring you and also how much satisfaction it will give you. Like, it's not that there's anything wrong with running ads. Morgan and I have both run ads very successfully, I would say. There's but, like, there's not as much personal satisfaction in ads as there is in the methods that we outline in the toolkit. And the methods in the toolkit do not require you to go spend hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars a month in Facebook ads. It's like most of them are free or
Yeah.
inexpensive. And there's literally nothing wrong with running ads, but if you if you are like, "I know that I have to make this work. I know that I want to make this work. This is the business." Like, we made that shortcut for you. We don't make that much money off of it. Like,
No.
I promise, like, it's and even the last 2 months, we've donated the proceeds all of the proceeds to victims of the hurricane, and
Yep.
like, I don't like, we don't care about making any money off of it. Like, we did it, we price it at what we price it at so that you take it seriously, but so that it's affordable for you to, like, legitimately grow your business, and so, like, it handles so much of marketing for you. You could literally do nothing but the toolkit. You don't ever have to add any other methods in. The toolkit will fill your calendar to make you a full-time photographer, making probably 60 to $100,000 pretty easily,
Yep.
and, like, that takes care of you. Like, I hope that takes care of you.
Yep.
So, anyway, that's just, like that I just like, it's not a plug in the sense that, like, "Oh, like, buy something from us and, like, make us money." It's a plug in that, like, we took so much of the hard work out of it for you. Like, we that is our blood, sweat, and tears,
Yep.
rescuing you from your own blood, sweat, and tears. So that's all. That's what I have
Like,
to say.
I 100% agree. We've worked really hard on it, and we hope that you guys go check it out. We love it. Obviously, Megan just gave you a whole, I don't want to say rant, but gave you a whole, like, testament on it. So go check that out. Also, please join our Facebook community. There's lots of helpful resources in there that will help you with wherever you're at in your photo business. So please go join that and make sure you tune in next Wednesday for another episode of the Photo Business Success Podcast. Thanks, guys. Bye.
I feel like that was good.